Having just watched all the way through Season 2 of Centaurworld, I still don't quite know how I feel about it. Don't get me wrong, I was a huge fan of Season 1, and all of the plot threads that I was waiting to get wrapped up, they do get paid off in amazing ways in this. This show does stick the landing in the final episode, The Last Lullaby, which I think is one of the best finales of a cartoon that I've seen, at least in recent years. I would compare it to the ending of Gravity Falls. It was that good. However, early on, this season really kind of lost me. It had me sort of worried about whether or not I would like the final product. And I think the biggest reason is that the early episodes of Centaurworld Season 2 feel like less a introduction into a new story and more like a victory lap for Season 1. Season 2, Episode 1 is serviceable enough. It opens with a really nice recap where we get to see all the old characters, we get revelations about Ched's backstory, and we get some clarifications in terms of world building about horse centaurs. All that stuff is well and good, though Melangela is a little bit underwhelming as an antagonist or even as an episode-specific character compared to the shamans before her. Then Episode 2 comes around, and the show just gets too meta too quickly. Like, don't get me wrong, I enjoy all this sort of stuff. Like, the Ember Island Players is great. That episode of Wander Over Yonder where Lord Hater makes a propaganda cartoon and it's in the Filmation style, I love that stuff. But in this episode, it's so clear because of the time frame of production that the bird tours are being written in anticipation of what fans might think about the show, rather as a reflection and homage to the free-forming fandom. Now, part of this can be blamed on the fact that this has to be a bingeable television show and that they were supposed to get these episodes out in advance, but in that kind of context and framework, maybe it's a good idea not to do an episode that references fandom to this extent. Now, there were some interesting ideas. Like, I like the fact that these horrible bird embryos are the way that the bird tours send messages to each other. And the writers obviously knew what they were doing when they made Mouthpiece a super fan of Comfortable Doug, who was a fan favorite character in the first season. But the fact that these terrible bird tours had to drag Womowink's name through the mud, who is the best character, and then joke about sidelining her and have it kind of literally happen for most of the rest of the season, maybe even the rest of the season period, it just kind of left me feeling like bad things were to come. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, the Bird Tour episode is the worst episode of the entire show, bar none, and the season begins to improve and steadily make its way back to the impeccable quality of Season 1 over the next couple adventures, which are wonderfully comedic if not compelling and showcase some of the most expressive and fluid animation that Mercury Filmworks has had to offer. The segments in Rider's World also play to the strengths of Centaurworld's other animation studio, Red Dog Culture House, and we get to see characters like Water Baby and Comfortable Doug, who have more cartoony character designs, moving with weight and deliberation like the rest of the human characters, which I thought was pretty cool. Again, though, the story content for a lot of these adventures falls flat because the solutions to a lot of the problems end up being, well, comedic and anticlimactic a lot of the time. It's just kind of Michael Jordan's Space Jam arm stretching out and making that final basket. But if you overuse the Space Jam arm, if it's all Space Jam arm, then nothing really feels like it matters within the context of the world. And I get that this is an intentional choice to dial up the silliness and show that Horse is still not good at Centaurworld in her own words, but the fact is, watching the character that we saw acclimate to this new world throughout the course of Season 1 fail over and over again as the plot becomes more nonsensical just means that it detracts from the overall actual story, which is best expressed in the Water Baby and Rider segments. I know I've made comparisons between Centaurworld and Over the Garden Wall before, and I think for the most part the comparisons are very warranted. However, Season 2 of Centaurworld takes some of Over the Garden Wall's least flattering elements and makes them a core part of its identity. In Over the Garden Wall, a lot of the plot points and a lot of the locations they go to are completely random. Charming in a 10-minute format, but in a 30-minute format, it just makes everything feel drawn out. I want to make it clear that I'm not accusing Centaurworld of being rushed storytelling. Quite the opposite. The entire rest of the story of the entire show could and was done beautifully from episode 6 to to 7 to 8, the finale of which is the length of 3 other episodes. The entire story fits there, and then there's just kind of this wibbly-wobbly, marshmallowy, meandering thing that is the first half of this season. And don't get me wrong, I love the characters, I love that we get more adventures with them, but the show just didn't really begin until episode 6, where it just started to get really good again. You know, like Centaurworld, the show that I love. On top of all of that, where were the songs throughout most of this? It felt like they didn't even really begin until episode 7. There were like musical stings and stuff and little like motifs, but for the most part, you know, Adventure Time songs. They were just kind of inserted wherever it would be funny or interesting for a character to sing a song. And they were fine songs, but there were much fewer of them, and it didn't have the cohesive feel of a musical the way the first season did. Now, this is the part of the video where I need to get briefly into spoiler territory because there's one more surface level observation that I need to make, and it's incredibly petty and bad faith, declaring my biases now, but I need to talk about it. And I don't think that this plot point is bad because of its implementation, because of what it allows, because of the methods of plot progression that it facilitates. I am purely annoyed by the terminology used describing the thing. We've gotten down to that level of low-tier YouTuber arguments. Brace yourself, folks. So in the episode Bunch of Scrunch, Horse and Wamawink actually finally have a heart-to-heart for the first time in the whole season, and it's really touching, and it's really emotional, and it's great, and they talk about that moment that Horse was able to go back and see Wamawink's past in season 1. Cue this becoming a canonical power for Horse, and her being able to travel back into people's backstories. Again, it does some really great things throughout the rest of the season, and really does facilitate a beautiful ending and a beautiful insight into all of the characters that we've come to know and love up until this point. But the fact that they use the term backstory to an irrational degree makes me mad. Oh boy, what a poop show that this video turned out to be. I mean, hopefully there is some constructive criticism mixed in with all of the nitpicks I was making, but the idea of having to, like, maintain a certain level of negativity as, like, a facade to convince you that, like, ah, yes, Dire Gentleman, he's really giving it to them this time, it's just exhausting and pointless, especially because I wouldn't be saying any of this stuff if I didn't overall love this show. I watched until the end because I cared so much about these characters, and they were entertaining the whole way throughout. It was just some minor plot quibbles. There's a lot of stuff that gets paid off from season 1 that I thought was really interesting. A lot of little details, like the Bear Tour having human-sized objects in his house from the start, and the birds always having shirts with people's faces on them. Durpleton's entire character arc this season was actually really touching, and they did a good job with Durpleton, who was, frankly, the least likable character from season 1. There's a lot of amazing stuff that happened in this show, and I'm gonna need to dedicate an entire separate analysis video that is a little bit more polished and a little bit more even-handed in order to really, like, get at why Centaurworld ended so strong. Because, make no mistake, this season 2 finale was the ending of the entire show in its completion, and I not only really respect that they were willing to go out with such a vote of confidence, but also that I can look at this story holistically in its entirety and analyze all of it, and I'm really looking forward to doing that, and I'm looking forward to rewatching it too, because I have a feeling that on the second watch, it's gonna start to grow on me. You might have noticed that this video is a little bit more loose and unscripted than what I usually do, do in the more video essay oriented stuff on this channel, but really it felt the most fitting for what my current feelings are at the time. I needed this. This was a therapeutic experience. But make no mistake, there will be at least one more video on Centaurworld Season 2 because I still think that there's a lot to talk about that didn't fit within the purview of this video. So, as always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and leave a like and a comment if you want to help me in the algorithm, and I'll be seeing you in the near future.